I don't know anyone whose spirits are not improved by a rainbow. It doesn't seem to matter where we are, stuck in traffic or sitting on a screened porch watching the wind blow foam across the lake. We're not expecting anything. It's raining and our souls have fallen asleep under the drumming on the roof. All plans are canceled. There's nothing to do but wait it out. So we sit there, sniffing all the things we can't smell when they're dry. Things like the street, the grass, the earth, the dog. The wet air is heavy in our nostrils. It lies against our cheeks like a washcloth while we wait for the clouds to pass. Before we know it, we're 5 years old again, sliding down a muddy bank in back of our house while the rain beats our hair flat against our heads. The taste of it in our mouths is sweet and salty, part sky, part us. It runs into our eyes and our ears. It runs down the back of our necks, cold, the best bath we've ever had. The sky is as gray as a dolphin. Now we look up, and there it is, a perfect patch of purest color, a rainbow, where we least expected it. What a wonderful idea. Who in the world thought of that? I know people who've never been superstitious in their lives, who still get quiet when they see a rainbow. They know it's just a trick the sun plays, the refraction of light in drops of water. But it sure does look like an omen, or a blessing. In his novel, Angle of Repose, Wallace Stegner tells the story of Oliver and Susan Ward, who raised a family on the western frontier late in the 19th century. While Susan labors with her fourth child after losing her third, Oliver stands outside their cabin and watches the sun go down with his eldest son, Ollie. Pacing back and forth in front of the shack, Oliver disappears from view, down to the corner of the cabin where Ollie hears him mutter, "Good Lord, look at that." Ollie hurries down to where his father is standing and sees him staring into the evening sky, where two rainbows perch one on top of the other, bright as colored glass, stretching from horizon to horizon. Oliver goes quickly to Susan's door, tapping at it with his fingernails. Sue, if you're able, look outside. There's an absolute sign, the most perfect double rainbow you ever saw. The door opens, and the doctor stands in it. Your wife isn't interested in rainbows, he says to Oliver. You've got a daughter, 3 minutes old. A woman I met during my days as a hospice chaplain told me about her own rainbow omen. When she was a little girl in North Carolina, she was inside listening to the radio when she heard the news that World War II was over. Running into the street, she found her entire neighborhood there, all of them cheering and crying and falling into each other's arms. She didn't remember who saw it first, but someone said, "Look, down there, over the pine trees." And there it was, a bright rainbow, as bright and glorious as their joy. It was God's promise of peace, she told me. We all knew it. The story of God, Noah, and the rainbow is one of the stories that have gotten down deep inside us. So deep that most of us make the connection that woman made. without even thinking about it. The rainbow is God's promise of peace, God's everlasting covenant with all creation. And it's hard to see one without experiencing a measure of that peace. The rainbow is God's pure gift to us, a colorful corrective for anyone who believes that all the grace in the Bible is solely in the New Testament. It's not. The sacred story is full of grace from the very beginning, although we've always had a perverse way of fighting it off. It's almost as if sometimes we just can't stand too much good news. God says in the story, I choose you to be my partners. Will you choose me? And we say, sure, but before you know it, we've got our sticky fingers in the till, embezzlers from the word go. That's what happened in today's story anyway. God made the whole world in one whirlwind week, pronounced it all good, and gave us the keys to the whole creation, with one notable exception, a fruit tree. One fruit tree, with a picket fence around and a small sign that said, private stock, please don't pick. But the fence and the sign didn't work, and things just started blowing up, one on top of the other. First, there was the trespass with the fruit, then the hiding from God in the garden, then the shameful, sad eviction, which even God couldn't stand. Before sending them out of Eden forever, God made Adam and Eve their first set of clothes. Just picture that. God, Almighty God, bent over some stiff animal skins with a needle and thread, so the poor, pale human creatures would have something to pull around them when they walked out the gates from the very beginning. But then things got worse. Adam and Eve's son Cain killed his brother Abel. The first murder, but not the last. And humankind went on breaking what God had made until by the 6th chapter of Genesis, God had finally run out of pity. I will blot out from the earth the human beings I have created, God said. People together with animals and creeping things and birds of the air. For I am sorry that I have made them. That may be the most sobering sentence in the whole Bible. What a fast catastrophe to go from God saw everything that God had made, and indeed it was very good, to I am sorry that I have made them, in just 5 short chapters. But there was one person who found favor in the sight of God, and to him God gave the blueprint for an ark. All of us who've heard the story have imagined it, I'm sure. The big roofed boat, looking more like a floating barn than a boat, filled to the rafters with life, with zebras, flamingos, king snakes, box turtles, barn owls, giraffes, hyenas, groundhogs, all of them floating above the wet chaos below, where the rest of creation was perishing, seeking higher and higher ground until there was none left, and then surrendering their last bubbles of air as the waters closed over their heads. It was awful. We focus on Noah and his zoo because they survived, but no one and nothing else did. The cleansing was complete. The destruction was total. And when the waters subsided, it was as if every hurricane we've ever heard of had circled the entire globe. God had willed it. But the result was so devastating that God willed never to will such a thing again. I establish my covenant with you, God said to Noah when it was all over, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. As a sign of the covenant, God set a rainbow in the clouds, not to jog Noah's memory, but to jog God's. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember. The history of the world, biblically speaking, is the history of God's promises to humankind. When we tell the sacred story, we tend to organize our telling around these promises. The promise of peace to Noah, the promise of a land and a nation to Abraham and Sarah, the promise of the law to Moses, the promise of a son to Mary. They're all the same promise at heart, the promise of intimate relationship with God. But that one promise has taken different forms over the years, as God has struggled to remain faithful to the orneriest bunch of partners a deity ever had. Covenant is the Bible's word for this strange and strong relationship. Established by God in creation, the covenant has survived floods and famines, wars and tumults, the rising and falling of empires. The prosperity of our own culture may be the worst blow the covenant has ever been dealt, but it's survived that too. And to this day, the promise still holds. I shall be your God, and you shall be my people. That's the heart of it, our belonging to God. God's belonging to us. The covenant of intimate relationship with God, always. Many of us hear an if at the end of it. I shall be your God, and you shall be my people, if you obey my laws, if you heed my commandments, if you sell all that you own and follow me. We're right to expect something like that, since most covenants are very clear about what each partner will and will not do. But God's covenant with Noah has no conditions. There isn't one word in it about what Noah will and will not do. It's all about what God will and will not do. I won't hurt you again like this, God promises Noah. I won't hurt the earth like this again. I won't do it. And I won't forget. Because I'm hanging up my bow where I can see it. Not a weapon anymore, but a reminder of the covenant between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. That's what God said to the whole waterlogged bunch, and not just to Noah and his family, but to all the thin, bewildered animals who were standing around. The musk ox whose hide had begun to mildew, the horse who had foundered from standing in water, the hawk who'd all but forgotten how to fly. From now on, God said, I'm in the protection business, not the destruction business. From now on, you are all my partners, and your lives are as precious to me as my own. What in the world happened? At the beginning of the story, God was mad enough to drown the whole earth. But here at the end, something major is shifted in God's mind. And my hunch is God has figured it out. God has figured out that humankind is not going to change. In no time at all, Jacob will be stealing Esau's birthright. Aaron will be around a golden calf. And David will be working out how to get Bathsheba's husband killed so he can have her all to himself. From now on, God will not repay betrayal with betrayal. From now on, God will not let his sorrow lead him to kill. She will bind herself to her creation in peace, promising herself to it, although she knows it will wound her. So, God will be wounded. So be it. God chooses to ally himself with this cantankerous creation, whatever the cost. If there is to be pain in the world, God chooses to share in it. Of course, bad things continue to happen to us, but this covenant is our assurance that none of them is rooted in God's ill will toward us. God is our ally, not our enemy. God's will for us is life, not death. And not just us two-legged creatures, but also the four-legged ones, and the winged ones, and those with no legs or wings at all. God's covenant includes clams and trout, and snails and lizards, and centipedes and tadpoles and fireflies. It includes all the species disappearing daily off the face of the earth. They are all heirs of God's promise, just like we are. Just because there are no conditions in Noah's covenant doesn't make us merely recipients of it. We are creatures made in the image of our Creator, after all, which makes us partners in God's plan. We too are allies of creation. We too are lovers of life, which means that we too are wounded by the brokenness we see around us, the brokenness we ourselves participate in. We are both the breakers and the healers, writes Barbara Brown Taylor, set into relationship with a God whose covenant calls us to shift the balance from death to life, whenever and wherever we can. It's still raining, my friends. The story isn't over yet. But those of us who've heard it before have a distinct advantage over those who have not, because we know something about how it turns out in the end. In our own time, the ark doesn't look like a barn floating on a choppy sea. It looks more like a blue-green ball bobbing on the dark ocean of space. Inside its gauzy atmosphere, there are black rhinos prowling the thorn bushes of the Serengeti, and garlands of monarch butterflies hanging from eucalyptus trees in California. There are baby chimney sweeps cheeping in suburban fireplaces, and coyotes howling in desert canyons. There are children in the Sudan eating hibiscus blossoms because there is nothing else left for them to eat. And there are war-wrecked men and women who wonder when, please God, when will the dove return to them with the olive leaf in her beak? We've all got a place in that ark. Not because we're all that righteous or worthy, but because it has pleased God to preserve our lives. Because life is sacred to God. Having destroyed it once, God has promised to never do it again. If we go on perishing, my view is that it has to do with our own amnesia. We've forgotten who we are and what we're supposed to be doing. We've forgotten whose covenant partners we are and how that covenant means for us to be bailing water and handing out life vests as fast as we can, so that every living creature who rides this ark with us may share the unmitigated joy of walking down the rickety ramp to plant a foot, a paw, or a hoof on dry land. God is not the only one who needs a rainbow. We need one too. A reminder of the promise between God and creation, between God and us, between God and every creature who shares the breath of life with us. However stuffy the air may get inside our ark, we can still, like God, remember. We can search the sky for the sign we know is there even when we can't see it. We can stay awake to it and to God and to one another until the next time we look up and see it. A perfect curve of color stretching clear across the sky. Do you see it, friends? There it is. God's everlasting promise to all of us who live in its embrace. Amen.